a background picture to the story, but I'm going to read the story of 2 Samuel chapter 9. Now, this is a story about a little boy called Mephibosheth. And maybe you know this story well, I'm sure you grew up with it. But it's a lovely story. It's where he was offered mercy instead of judgment. And you know, that's our God this morning. He offers us mercy instead of judgment. And it's good to have a God who loves us like that. And this story is a beautiful story that brings it all together. 2 Samuel and chapter 9. And David said, "Is there yet any that is left of the house of Saul, that I may show kindness, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? And there was of the house of Saul a servant whose name was Ziba. And when they had called him unto David, the king said unto him, Art thou Ziba? And he said, Thy servant is he. And the king said, Is there not yet any of the house of Saul, that I may show the kindness of God unto him? And Ziba said unto the king, Jonathan hath yet a son, which is lame on his feet. And the king said unto him, Where is he? And Ziba said unto the king, Behold, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, in Lodebar. The king David sent and fetched him out of the house of Marcus, and the son of Amiel from Lodebar. Now when Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, was come unto David, he fell on his face and did reverence. And the king said, Mephibosheth, and he answered, Behold thy servant. And the king said unto him, Fear not, for I will surely show thee kindness, for Jonathan thy father's sake. And I will restore thee all the land of Saul thy father, and thou shalt eat bread at my table continually. And he bowed himself and said, What is thy servant, that thou shouldest look upon such a dead dog as I? Then the king called to Ziba, Saul's servant, and said unto him, I have given unto thy master's son all that pertaineth to Saul and to all his house. Thou therefore and thy sons and thy servants shall till the land for him, and thou shalt bring in all the fruits, and that thy master's son may have food to eat. But Mephibosheth, thy master's son, shall eat bread always at my table. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then said Ziba unto the king, According to all that my lord the king hath commanded his servant, so shall thy servant do. As for Mephibosheth, said the king, he shall eat at my table as one of the king's sons. And Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah, and all that dwelt in the house of Ziba were servants unto Mephibosheth. So Mephibosheth dwelt in Jerusalem, for he did eat continually at the king's table, and was lame on both his feet. We probably know this story from childhood. We've taught it maybe in Sunday school. But you know what? You can never exhaust God's word. There is so much in it that we can keep going back to it. And it's like the 23rd Psalm. We can continually read and read and read and always find something new. But a little background before we come to the story of Mephibosheth. The background is, and we all know it, but let's just go over it again anyway. The background is very simple. Saul has been promoted to become the king, and that was the people's choice. But David was God's man. David was God's choice. And even though king had been anointed and was the king of Israel, there came a point in the life of David and in the point of Jonathan, Saul, the king's son, that these two boys became very good friends. So much so they were like twins. They had a tremendous love and respect for each other. David became very popular. He wasn't king, but he was anointed to become the king because Samuel had already gone to the house of Jesse and looked at the sons of Jesse. And when he looked at the sons of Jesse, he did not find the one that he felt he could anoint until he said to Jesse, have you any other sons? And Jesse sort of said, oh yes, I have one younger boy. He's out looking after the sheep, but he's young and he's not of fighting soldier kingship quality. That's basically what he was saying. And Samuel said, well, go get him. And they went and they brought him in. And when he comes in, says his face was ruddy and of a lovely complexion. He, as a young boy, knew what it was to live close to God as a shepherd. And the moment he comes in, God speaks to Samuel, and God says to Samuel, anoint him. He's the one. Because, what does it say? Man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks on the heart. And so David is anointed. But David has to go through what we might say an apprenticeship. And he certainly goes through the ropes or the rings of trials and tribulation before he becomes the king of Israel. And then there's this war going on between Israel and the Philistines. We all know it, don't we? The war is simply this, that there is a man called Goliath, over 9 feet tall. Now that's amazing, because I think there's a door 6'6", and if you put another 2.5 feet on it, that's a pretty tall. If Goliath walked in here this morning, first of all, he would have to stoop to get in. But boys, when he would stretch himself out again, he would draw attention. He definitely would be revered, and no one would stand against him, I'm sure. He was a man of war. He was a giant of a man. And the Philistines had gone to war against Israel, and they were down in the valley, and they were fighting, and it was on day after day after day. And then Goliath, as we know the story, comes up with this request. Let's finish this war once and for all. Pick a man. And let me fight this man, and whoever wins the battle. If your man kills me, then we'll become your slaves. But if I kill him, you will become our slaves. Goliath had tremendous confidence in himself that he could do it. There's a lot of Goliaths around today, isn't there? A lot of Goliaths. A lot of people with a lot of confidence. Almost verging on cockiness. And David is sent by Jesse, his father. After Samuel has anointed him, his father says to him there, and go into 1 Samuel 16:17 and read it. But Jesse says, David, I need you to go down to the battlefront and bring some food. Now, I am not a lover of cheese. There are people who love it. I have grandchildren, and they could eat it like I could eat chocolate. And I can eat a lot of chocolate. Boys, they love cheese. And the smell of it turns my stomach. But I know you love cheese. But it's a biblical food, so I can't say very much more. Because David was told to take cheese to these men, so cheese must have been good for them as well. David goes down and he hears this man called Goliath coming, and he throws the challenge out again. 40 days, and he throws the challenge, pick a man. And David, as a young shepherd boy, is looking at his brothers, 3 of them in the battlefield. 3 of them are in the army of Israel. And they're supposed to be fighting in the name of God, in the name of Jehovah, in the name of Yahweh. And they're afraid of this giant. And he throws a challenge out, and David says, is there not a cause? Is there no one to fight this man? And David, who's not even a soldier, he's a shepherd. David steps up and David says, I'll take him on. Now I'm sure the three brothers must have thought, my goodness, typical. One cocky wee boy. He'd just been anointed to become a king. Now he thinks he can do everything. You can hear the brothers' brains ticking over. But David, after he goes back and speaks to Saul, Saul mocks him. Saul puts his armor on him and it almost trips him. And he says, I'll fight him in what I know best. And he went and he got 5 stones on his sling. David had already fought 2 battles. David had already fought a lion. David had already fought a bear. It took a little lamb, and David says, that lamb belongs to me. And he went and he got that animal and he killed it. And he got the little lamb free. Boys, I don't think you or I would want to tackle a bear or a lion. I know when we go to Africa, we see them. And I have never had any desire to get out of the vehicle. And the faith that I put in a glass of window, and a pane of glass in a window, which is only millimeters thick, is remarkable, that a lion can come along and even bruise the side of the window with his tail. And I'm sitting thinking, can't get me. That little sheet of glass, I put my trust in. David was able to step out. And so David kills it. And David says to Saul, I'm not afraid of him. I'll go in the name of my God. And he goes, and we know the story, don't we? He kills Goliath. 1 stone. As one preacher once said, I heard many years ago, Stephen Alford. Dr. Stephen Alford, I don't know whether he was quoting a preacher, but this is not my saying, so don't go out thinking I'm smart on it. But I quote, David's brothers may have shouted, he's too big to hit. And David says, he's too big to miss. And I have no doubt, I seriously believe that David prayed continuously. And he was praying as he put the stone in the sling. And he was praying as he let it go. And I could almost hear that prayer. God, I'll throw it, but you need to guide it. And God guided that stone, and it went right in where there was a place open for the hit. Saul thought he was covered, but there was one point he hadn't covered. And bang! And down he went. And that starts a major problem, because when the giant went down, Saul is king. Jonathan, his son's alive. Mephibosheth, his grandson, is alive. And others of the royal household are alive. But whenever they fight this giant, and this giant is put down and is over and finished with, here's what it says in 1 Kings 18. And it came to pass as they came, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with musical instruments and with joy and with music. And the women answered one another as they played and said, Saul has slain his thousands. Can you see Saul going, thank you, thank you. But David, his tens of thousands, that hit Saul like a dagger. He's getting more praise than I. And jealousy sets in. It's already been there, but it's deepened. You know, we can almost see it in our day and generation. Touting for power, pushing for position, wanting the praise, hugging and courting the cameras. Look at me. Look at me. Look what I've done. But it all turns, and it's all focused on a little shepherd boy now. The war is raging. It's just war after war after war, bloodbath after bloodbath after bloodbath. And then you turn to 1 Samuel 24, and you come up against this situation. Whenever Saul has gone back home to his royal palace, it says in chapter 24, 1 Samuel, and it came to pass when Saul was returned from following the Philistines, that it was told to him, saying, Behold, David is in the wilderness of En-gedi. You know, Saul, we know where David is. He's up in the mountains in En-gedi, in the hills, and he's a sitting duck. Now is the time to go get him. And Saul, in his anger, came to pass that he heads off. And Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel and went to seek David and his men upon the rocks and the wild goats. Saul is in raging anger. He says, I'll take him out once and for all. I'll finish him. And he goes to the mountains of En-gedi, into the wilderness. And it came to pass, and he came to the sheep cuts by the way, and there was a cave. And Saul needed to use the toilet. Now the King James says he went in to cover his feet. Now in my wildest dreams, I could never work out what that meant. What did he go in to cover his feet? What did that mean? So I had to go, and I'm going to be honest with you, I read other translations and other parts of what they called the Greek and the Hebrew to try and get it. And basically what it says is he needed to relieve himself. I could never say to my wife, I need to cover my feet. Well, that's one way of doing it. Nobody knows what you're talking about. But what she was saying is, I think there's a toilet around the corner. So he went in to use the toilet. He went in to relieve himself on his own. But what he didn't know was there was men in the cave. Who was it? David and his soldiers. And the men of David said unto him, Saul has come in. He has dropped his skirts or his garments to go to the toilet. And while he's relieving himself, the men of David said unto him, Behold, the day of which the Lord has said unto you, Behold, I will deliver thine enemy into thine hand. Thou therefore mayest do to him as it seems good to you. And David arose, and he cut off a piece of his robe secretly. Saul had taken off his robe to use the toilet, as it were. And David slipped up with a knife, dagger, whatever it was. He cut off a piece of the king's garment and took it away. And Saul didn't realize how close he was to death. One step away from death. But David wouldn't touch him. In verse 8 it says, And David arose afterwards, after he had done this, and he went out of the cave, and he cried unto Saul, saying, My Lord and King! And when Saul looked behind him, David stooped with his face to the earth and bowed himself. David still gave him reverence. David still gave him respect. Do you know why? Because David says in verse 10 at the end, You are the Lord's anointed. You're the Lord's anointed. Touch not the Lord's anointed. That's a big one, isn't it? somebody God is using. Don't touch them. And David wouldn't. David didn't take the advice of his spads, as we would know them as today in the political world. Now's your opportunity. Now's the time to get in for the kill. Now's the time for power to take over David. Get in there and put him down. David said no. He wouldn't do it. But then, during a period of time, the war continues. Jonathan is killed. Saul is badly wounded, and Saul asked someone to take his life. Saul asked for someone to kill him, and they wouldn't, and he fell upon his own sword. He fell upon his own sword. I remember a situation that I was talking about something to a very, I would say a very godly man. And I wondered how to get out of it, or how to get around it, or what was the best way to get through it. And I asked him for some advice. How would I deal with the situation? I said, I think there's something, and I don't like what I see, and I wonder, how can I deal with this? And here was the advice. And we have heard this before, haven't we? Just give him enough rope. He'll hang himself. And you know what? I took that advice. And within, I would say, weeks, it was sorted out. And I didn't have to do a thing. And the gentleman that I was dealing with said, never forget, God's in control. God sees everything. Saul is now out of the situation. Jonathan's dead. And now we come to the story of Mephibosheth. So I'm not going to be long with you. I'm going to be brief with the story, all right? Now you've got the history of it, the story. You know all the background, but someone says, I think the Bible should be brought alive when we're speaking. Tell the story as it is. Bring it alive. Make people go out and remember it. That's why I asked. My wife says, I think you told that story before about the umbrella. So I asked those who have got the sharpest brains. I said to Florrie and to Roy at the back, did I tell the story here of an umbrella before? She says, no. Somebody else held something up. I said, that was Keith Lindsay carrying a flagpole. So if you did hear the story of the umbrella before, you're better brains than me, because I can't even remember. But anyway, it doesn't do any harm to tell it twice. I don't think I told it in here before, but that's all right. Sure, many a man preaches the same sermon 100 times. So David now has come to the throne. When David comes to the throne, there's something that happens when it becomes a new family, a new royal throne. In these days in which they lived, the new king had the right and the law to extinguish every member of the former royal family. Isn't that amazing? So Mephibosheth would have been put to death. And the reason for that was simple, that no one of the previous royal household could challenge the seat of authority. No one could come along and say, this belongs to me. Read the story, read the history of it. You'll find it all there. They would have wiped out the family. My wife often says to me, isn't the Bible cruel at times? I says, I know when I get to heaven, I'm going to have to, if we get a chance to ask, you can ask the Lord, why was that? Why did that? I don't know. I just don't know. We were talking about it there just a few days ago. Bobby McKee He was murdered up in Kilkeel there by his son. He was an adopted boy. I know the family. I know Harold, his brother, very well from Kilkeel, and I messaged Harold. And Bobby was a very strong Christian believer. And I said to Laverne, was it last night even? I think it was last night. We're just lying thinking about it because the funeral was only there on Friday, and we've been praying for the family. And the wife was very, very ill. In fact, Harold had said that they're waiting to see if Yvonne, she doesn't want her husband buried till she's fit to come out to attend the funeral. So that's why it was so long till the funeral took place just there on Friday. But I said to Laverne, why does bad things happen to good people? Why did a man like Bobby McKee have to go through such a serious ordeal? And his wife to be beaten around the head so much and try to murder her as well. And I can't come up with answers for that. And I'm going to be honest with you, I wish I could. But I have said, Lord, why does bad things happen to good people? I just don't work it out. I can't. But I got to leave it with God. I just think it's sin and the evilness of sin. And David could have wiped out the whole family. And there's a nurse. Mephibosheth is 5 years of age. 2 Samuel chapter 4 verse 4 says, Jonathan, son of Saul, had a son who was lame in both feet. He was 5 years old. Well, what happened to him? Here's what it says. Whenever the nurse who was nursing this boy, Mephibosheth, found out what had happened and that Jonathan had died and that Saul had died, she knew that David was going to take the throne, and she knew what the consequences were for this boy, and she had such a love for this boy. You see, there was a bond between the nurse and Mephibosheth because she had looked after him in the royal palace. Mephibosheth would have been in line for the throne after his father Jonathan had taken that throne and died. It would have been then Mephibosheth. But now they're gone. David's on the throne. Now David has the law and the backing to kill everyone, to wipe them out. And the nurse picks him up and fled. And as she fled, Mephibosheth fell. And something happened during the fall that this boy, both his legs were broken. So much so that he became lame. You know, I had thought about this and I thought, well, would they not have repaired and fixed at that age again? We have a neighbour who was up in the north coast here a few weeks ago, and she went out with her husband for a walk over near Ballintoy, and as she was walking on a piece of wooden walkway, had been wet, and she slipped. And she put her hand down as she slipped, and she broke her wrist. She ended up on the causeway, and she got some plaster Paris put on it, had to go back 3 times in her stay up here because the hand began to swell. In fact, it was this hand, the left hand, began to swell, and they went to cut it off and help her to get more relief. But then she went down back to Lurgan, and then she had to go to Craigavon because of it. And when she went there, and a specialist looked at it, he said to her, I'm going to be honest with you here, but what they have done for you is absolutely hopeless. Because that break is so great that you need a plate in there. And if you don't get a plate in that there and pinned, he says you will have minimum use of the left hand. And she only slipped and went down and tried to rescue herself. And we're only talking about 3 feet from here to the ground. But great was that break that the doctor surgeon said to her, had you not got the plate in that, you would have had minimum usage. you would have been immobile with a lot of fingers. And a simple fall. She's got it all sorted now. And she's still going to have a little bit of less use with it, he told her. She won't be able to put her hand right back. But he says, who wants to do that? Unless you're a policeman, but you just do that. But I thought, what a simple thing happened, and yet what it could have been. This boy falls, breaks both his legs. Nothing in those days, we're talking thousands of years ago, nothing happens. The boy is crippled. But he escapes to the place called Lodibar. He's miles away. And the king takes the throne now as David, and as David takes the throne, David begins to think of a covenant. David has had a covenant with Jonathan, Saul, this boy's father, and the covenant was simply this: if anything happens to either of the two of us, if either of us are killed or die, whatever, will you look after my family? And if anything happens to you, I'll look after your family. And after David is on the throne, and he's on the throne for quite a while before he comes up with this, because when this boy is brought back to the palace, he's now a man because he has now got a child. And so David is one day sitting at the throne, or sitting around the table, and he begins to think of the covenant that he once had made with Jonathan. And he thought, I wonder, is there anyone still alive? Why did he say that? Because all were wiped, he thought. And he says to one of the men in the palace, he says to a man in the palace, Ziba. Ziba had worked for Saul. He was one of Saul's servants, so he knew the background of all the family situation. And he says to this man, he says, Ziba, is there anyone that is left of the household of Jonathan, the household of Saul? Is there anyone? And Ziba said, there is a boy. He is Jonathan's son. He's a cripple. You see, Ziba knew. All those years he knew, but he kept it quiet. He knew the consequences too. He didn't say a word, but when he was asked by the king, is there anyone left? He said yes. Why did he not come to the king in the earlier days? Why did he wait? Was it to protect the boy from death? The boy's an invalid. And King David issues an invitation. Go and get him. Go get him. And Ziba goes off to Lodibar, and he goes to Lodibar. He says to the young man, the king wants to see you. The king wants to see you. What he says here, he says, is there anyone that is still alive that I may show him kindness? This is what David said to Ziba. Is there anybody left of the household of Jonathan, of Saul, that I may show him kindness? Here's what the Hebrew word for kindness could be. It can be translated, can I show him goodness, mercy, favor, and loving kindness? I want him to have the best if he's still there. And he goes, and Ziba tells Mephibosheth, the king wants to see you. This was a frightening moment. A frightening moment for Mephibosheth, because Mephibosheth would have known that all his family is wiped. That the king had the authority to do that, and I'm the only one left. And he's probably thinking, it's my day. My day has come. He probably was waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for that knock on the door. The king wants to see you. And he's frightened because he's thought, I'm heading for death. And the invitation is to come. Is there anyone alive? Yes. Go get him. Bring him here. And the invitation is issued, and up he comes. He's an invalid, so he's had to have some help to get there. Transportation. And when he arrives at the palace, he's introduced to the king. He's scared. He's an invalid. He's come at the invitation of the king to stand before the throne. You see, one day you and I are going to stand before the throne. But you know what the beauty is? When the king says it's time to come, we're not going in fear. We're going knowing that we're going to see the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Whenever Mephibosheth comes and he's brought before the king, I love the little chorus we used to sing. I don't hear it much. He brought me into his banqueting house, and his banner over me is love. David simply says, come. Come on in. Don't be afraid, he said to them. Don't be afraid. Verse 7, don't be afraid. For I will surely show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. And I'm going to restore all to you all the land that belongs to your grandfather Saul. You will eat always at my table. What a position. He's brought into a new position. He's been living in poverty down in Lodibar. And now he's brought to the palace where he was as a child until he was 5. So we'd have known something about it. And now he comes in. Can you imagine at 5 when he comes back again and he looks around and he says, I remember this place as a boy. And now the king says, come back. What a position. What a position. He says, you are going to eat at my table every day. You're going to become just like my son. You're going to be treated as royalty. The boy couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe it. He even says, why are you treating me such a dead dog as I am? What he was basically saying to David was, David, I'm useless. What can I do? I can't walk. Look at the cut of me. I've nothing to offer you. And David says, it's okay. I'm the king, and you're one of my sons. You're adopted into this family. He sat every day at the king's table. He not only that, look at the inheritance he got. He got all the land that was owned by his grandfather. He got all that land. And he must have thought, oh, David, you're going to give me land. How am I going to work it? I can't even move. I can't walk. And David says, don't worry about it. Ziba and all his sons and his servants, they're all going to work the land. They're going to bring in the crops. And you're going to get off the crops. You're going to live off the land, off the crops. You're going to continually come every day, and you're going to sit at my table. Wow. You and I this morning have an inheritance, incorruptible, undefiled, that doesn't fade away. We're prepared for us. We're in the heavenlies. You know what, this morning? It's only a matter of time. And you and I are going to sit forever at the king's table to an inheritance that's never going to fade. You're allowed to say amen. If you're a believer this morning, that's where we're going. This world's going to die. This world's going to go out of it all. This world is in top gear for destruction. You just watch what's going on at the minute. It's in top gear. Israel, at this point in time, the world is turning against them. Touch not the Lord's anointed. Israel is the apple of his eye. And you listen to what's going on at the minute. America and Britain are now turning against Israel. Touch not God's anointed. They're God's people. They have come through more wars and troubles than you and I could ever dream of. And they're still a people. And they're only a minority. But they'll never be destroyed because they're God's people. You see, the giant thought he could destroy David. But it was the little boy who destroyed the giant. He said the world is turning against Israel. But David is just like Israel. And Israel is just like David. And when God fires the stone, the giants will tumble. Haven't we got a great God? Are you looking forward to going to heaven? I hope you are, because I don't want to disappoint you, but we're near there. Because I'm coming 66, and I'm even thinking this last while to my wife, if the Lord spares us for another 10 years, what will we do? That would make me 70, coming 76, and I'm thinking 76. Now, some of you folk are probably thinking, I wish I was 76. Do you know what? It's only a matter of time when the King's going to send his son for you. Just as he sent Ziba to go get him in Lodibar, God's going to send his son. You know what he's going to say? It's time to come home. The palace is ready. The meal is set. Come home, my boy. Come home. Let's pray. Father, thank you for the opportunity this morning